everyone, and this is update for October 14, 2022, day 233 of the war, and of the date update. So I would like to do, again, as always, a little bit of general information, and then we're going to do walks through the front line. In terms of general information, this past 2 days, October 14 and 13, have seen much reduced Russian attacks against the energy infrastructure in Ukraine. So as a result, the damage has been done is pretty much minimal. It's about very ballparking, but it's about 10% of the first 2 days, which were, I think, it was 11 and 12. In terms of strategy, and not actually strategy, in terms of the tools sort of the business that Russian side is using, it's more and more actively using those Iranian UAVs, which is Shahid 136. And despite the fact that that UAV is very primitive, Ukraine side doesn't have any strategic answer to that. So what it's trying to do is actually trying to use fighter airplanes such as MiG-29, Su-27 to shoot them down, and they are this Iranian UAVs are sort of like easy prey for those fighters. But the problem is then what Russian side is doing, they launching anti-air rockets from there from here from Belgorod and Kursk region, and so they shut down Ukrainian fighters. So basically, in a way, this Shahid 36 is almost like a like a cheese in a mousetrap for Ukrainian fighter airplanes. So several of them got shot down over past couple days. So again, then that's a really huge blow for Ukrainian air forces, which don't have many airplane in its disposal. I don't have exact information, as I'm not really focused on tracking on Air Force, but just came across this information, so just wanted to share for those who are interested in this. This Shahid 136 remains a credible target, and the importance of all of that is they are super cheap, easy to make, and so the Russian side will continue to use them extensively, and especially since they see that there is no adequate answer from Ukrainian side to them. Now let's switch a little bit to the Russian side. One other thing is, in response, the Ukrainian side attacked those transformer station or interconnectors in Belgorod, sorry, here, which is capital of Belgorod region. As I mentioned before, those attacks are they're not useless. They probably more like a psychological effect. From a practical perspective, they are useless because Russian energy system immediately supplies electricity from other sources, and it has tons of it. So that definitely not creating any any problems. Probably it creates psychological pressure and pressure among population, including pressure to evacuate, right? Because it's becoming very clear that Belgorod is becoming sort of part of the war zone, essentially, which has been happening with all of this towns and villages along the Ukrainian border in Belgorod region. So that's been going on there for a while. Kursk is sort of more sort of safer because the distance to Ukrainian border is much larger there. So then let's switch to Russian president, who gave speech today in Kazakhstan at some meeting that he attended there. And the essence of the speech was that Russia is sort of like a forced to do this mobilization. And I would say this is too little too late. This mobilization was very clear that was needed probably at the beginning of March, when everything started to falling apart, and it was even becoming more clear at the end of March, when Russian troops were forced to withdraw from from Kiev region, Chernihiv region, and Sumy region, because simply they didn't have enough resources to control, and they were getting killed there by 1,000 cuts. So, and that's what the again this was the admission from Russian president, who's saying, okay, the front line is about 1.1 thousand kilometers. Uh, Simply regular troops, we don't have enough of those. In I would say they probably had enough at the beginning, but at this point, yes, there is definitely not enough. So you need to refill with the conscripts. His numbers that he quoted, and I'm not saying that sort of trust those numbers. This is just a data point, and maybe largely useless data point, but nevertheless I just want to share those numbers. So the total sort of quoted number is that that's a target number of the conscripts is 300,000. The number that's sort of the number of conscripts that already sort of called is 222,000. So he was saying that essentially this whole effort is almost over, just two more weeks, and it's going to be over. Out of this 222,000, sorry, 16,000 are already on the front line, and I think 30 plus thousand in the in the units that are about to go to front line. This is, if anything, this is our just lower boundary, I would say, for this whole effort that's being done, because there are more and more videos surfacing in Russia where it's showing that the employees of this, I don't know how I call it, drafting organization, drafting authorities, they try to catch people literally everywhere. There were a video from St. Petersburg in Russia where they simply came to, apartment building, and at 7:30 a.m. and basically any male that's sort of right age that was leaving received the conscription notice or whatever. I don't know how you call it right in English, but this paper saying like, okay, you're required to show up to the conscription station. So again, this is happening in Moscow. This is happening in St. Petersburg, which kind of tells that the number of people who are sort of being conscripted into the army is much larger than 300,000. Russia would not have problem to call 300,000 people, even from those kind of like more like a rural or remote areas. There's plenty of people who sort of almost want to participate in something like this, because the lack of economic opportunities, or a complete absence of economic opportunities for them, and there is no sort of light in the end of the tunnel in terms of that something is going to happen there, and it almost to the point it's like, okay, this is adventure to see something, otherwise you just see very depressing world around you. So that's kind of like what's going on there. So again, all of these numbers that were quoted by the Russian president are just a sort of lower boundary. The real numbers are much larger. In terms of now, let's talk about the sort of psychological situation with Russian troops. There are more and more videos sort of also surfacing where it's very clear. I mentioned yesterday about like Russian troops just, Russian soldiers just basically got in contact with Ukrainian ones and just negotiated surrender essentially, right? So there was no pressure, no fighting. They just want to surrender. Some not exactly the same, but there was another video showed up on Kherson bridgehead where Russian troops essentially were retreating pretty much under extremely light pressure. And the sort of discussion, one of the soldiers, the main comment was from the sort of soldiers who sort of driving that effort is like, okay, let's just get out. It's not worth it. That was sort of his comment, right? So we're going to get cut off. It's not worth it. Let's retreat. So as you can see, the morale is it's obviously all anecdotal, but it does feel that morale is low on the Russian side. At the same time, we cannot say that Ukrainian troops are advancing at a fast pace on Kherson bridgehead and North Luhansk front line. So this, you know, to extent, we maybe even say there's some lack of sort of right approach on the Ukrainian side. Hard to say, but there's clear evidence that Russian troops are low, demoralized, and not. Let's put this way: they're not willing to die anymore, right? If there is any like credible threat, they either retreat or some of them just surrender, and that's creating a lot of opportunities that it looks like they so far have were sort of wasted and neglected by Ukrainian command. Now let's and then one more other point from the Russian president's speech was that this not oil, grain export deal that was signed for 120 days, which is essentially 4 months, was signed at the beginning of July. I don't remember, July 5th or something around that. So it's expiring, this November, pretty soon. And it looks like it's going to be one-off deal because he was kind of alluding a little bit, saying, okay, well, there is explosive and ammunition being brought in by the ships, or they being used to do this to blow up the Crimean bridge, or try to do other diversions on the Russian infrastructure. Therefore, he feels that potentially this deal essentially may not be extended. So it was very vague. So it wasn't very definite answer, but it's basically there's some kind of negotiations going on behind the scenes where Russian side is demanding something in return for allowing for this deal to be extended. Because if this deal is not extended, essentially all of Ukrainian agriculture is kind of dead. And as a result, and Russian, by the way, the same, not dead, but semi-dead. That's a little bit over dramatizing the situation. So it's going to be basically at very low level, and the same goes true for Russian side. What this really means that, as I mentioned many times before, if things don't change, next year there will be really tight situation with the food and borderline famine, and not in developing countries, but more in the developed world. Unclear how, like, sort of where the weak links are gonna be. Don't have that information, but there's clearly gonna be acute shortages of food, and it's gonna be a problem, and that's also gonna help to sustain high inflation. So that's why, when I was talking first about this whole desire to get inflation under control by increasing interest rates, that this is a very counterproductive approach, and it actually may not work at all and create basically total social unrest in the West. Because if there is not enough grain, no matter like how high you're going to increase the interest rates, it's not going to materialize any kind of grain, and people will be hungry, right? So it's just going to lead to riots and things of that nature. And having high interest rates, it may only make things actually much worse, because it's not going to be just food, but it's going to hit pretty hard housing market, and it's already hitting in the US. That's basically like housing market in the US essentially having heart attack at this time, and not like, if these things persist, there will be 2008 type of housing crash in the US, and it looks like Europe is not willing to go sort of to press the pedal on the interest rates, because it has already enough problems. So the sort of leadership there kind of more careful about that situation. Nevertheless, and that's why we see much higher inflation. Well, well, not much, but higher inflation in Europe, and in that sort of low teens, versus in the US it's in high single digit, like 7-8%, versus like, let's say 10, 11, 12% in Europe. But again, interest rates is a wrong tool to address the problem. Again, I just want to reiterate, the right solution is to increase supply, and that really means reversing, energy policies, all of those policies that lead to the fight on the producer of the resources, right? And generally producer, and increasing all of the regulations in the economy and so on. It's all leads to reduction in supply, and reduction in supply leads to inflation, shortages, and if it's not resolved, to eventual potential societal collapse. I don't think we're going there, but this is the sort of, if nothing is done right, this is the sort of end point of all of this. Now let's actually switch to the situation on the front line. So there was quite a bit of artillery fire exchange along the state border. Nothing new, sort of traditional situation, giving this whole another level of sort of exchange of these fights, of the attacks against the energy infrastructure. Now let's jump into the North Lugansk front line. Things here are more or less stable. No essential changes. There are some reports that Ukrainian troops are slowly pushing Russian troops. For example, there are unconfirmed reports that Ukrainian troops gain control of this village Kuzemivka, and some moves here. There's no firm no sort of second or independent confirmation. So for now, I keep it the way it is. Essentially, it's extremely slow move by Ukrainian forces, and giving the whole situation of like general initial advantage of Ukrainian side. There was a lot of sort of missed opportunities here. Not to mention that, as I mentioned, Russian side is actively channeling all of these conscripts to the frontline units, and the two areas where they go for the most part is this North Luhansk frontline and then Kherson bridgehead. Those are the most critical for now situation for the Russian side. There are also some reports that Russian troops try to counterattack here at Terny without much success, which makes sense given that they are outnumbered and so on. But again, this is clearly missed opportunity by Ukrainian side here. Now let's jump quickly to the North Donbass section of the front line. Things here are pretty much as, like, I don't want to be broken record, but that's kind of how it is. Russian attacks by Wagner mercenaries against Soledar, Bakhmut, without progress today. From time to time, they manage to sort of make advances, but things are the same. Again, this Opitny here, this is another place of sort of extreme tension. All of this Kurdumivka, Azaryanivka, Bedradivka, so all of this sort of, call it like line of fire, all of the south of Bakhmut. But so far, Wagner mercenaries were not able to advance anywhere today. That doesn't mean that they're not going to advance tomorrow. It's totally sort of part of how it works, right? No advance for 3, 4, 5 days, then there is a breach. And again, nothing for 2, 3 days, whatever, 4 days, and then again. So this is kind of like normal sort of process in this area. Now let's quickly jump to central Donbass front line. Things here are, again, the same. No essential changes. Russian attacks out of this Pisky salient. Everything else is more or less the same. Now let's quickly look at Zaporizhya front line. Things here are, as always, quiet. By quiet, I just want to qualify it. There is always exchange of artillery fire. There's always reconnaissance action, which means skirmishes. by both sides, probing attacks. So it's not that it's truly quiet. It's just there's no large scale fencing with long term goals or even like medium term goals. It's all sort of very small, very tactical situation here. Now let's move to Kherson bridgehead here. There was Russian side essentially reports there's very little pressure, just mostly tactical pressure by Ukrainian troops here, and this basically between Dnipro River and Ingolets River here. So essentially all of this area where there is a hope by Ukrainian side that this is how the situation is going to get resolved on Kherson bridgehead by reaching this dam here near at Novokakhovka. Mm, but and this is where I spoke about that video where Russian troops were basically retreating under light pressure. It was made somewhere here, somewhere on this front line. So apparently there are some small, snail pace advances by Ukrainian troops, but again, there's no that sort of quick moves that were happening before, where there was very clear breach of Russian defenses, and essentially there was almost a panic on Russian side. Versus right now, it's more like a measured retreat by Russian troops here. Otherwise, there was no large scale pressure by Ukrainian troops anywhere on the bridgehead, and obviously there was not much action by the Russian side because they totally on defensive at this point. Okay, thanks for watching, and until tomorrow, bye bye.